Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Gesha Village Lot 25032 wash processed Ethiopia from Ceto Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Ceto, based out of Keyport, New Jersey. And this is their fourth ever appearance on this channel, having reviewed a couple of their coffees earlier this year. When I found out that they were doing a collaboration with Airworks, it immediately caught our interest for a couple of reasons. First of which being that we did have some pretty positive results with the coffees that we did review from them. But the second reason being that we do essentially review every single collaboration that Airworks does. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this coffee turned out, as this right here is day 59. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Ceto's recipe, which is a 16.25 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 92 degrees Celsius, about 197 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, I've often heard Ceto described as being on the slightly more developed side of an ultra light profile. And to put it in context, if we do compare it alongside some American coffee roasters like Shoebox, which is considered an ultra light profiled coffee roaster, and say which is generally still considered a lighter American based coffee roaster, I would actually say that Ceto skews a little bit closer to Shoebox than it does to Say. It is between the middle of those two coffee roasters, but based off some of the results we got from this coffee, I would say it just skews a little bit lighter in comparison to those, I should say, but not as much as Shoebox. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 25, first impression through the V60, and that was definitely the first takeaway I did have from it, as it did feel like this coffee needed significantly more time, as it was offering plenty of the lighter profiled characteristics, where it essentially offered a savory tea-like quality with a bit of a grainy characteristic as well. So honestly, the only takeaway I had from this coffee was that it didn't feel like it was ready to be brewed with a very faint citric quality in the background. Day 29 through the Chemex, and there was definitely a similar sentiment this time around, as it still feels like this coffee will need significantly more time to open up, as the best descriptor I have for this coffee is essentially light profiled coffee, that sort of grainy characteristic once again. In addition to that, some traces of the lemon citrus, the honey continues to remain the most abundant, but also a subtle peach characteristic as the coffee does cool down, showing a glimmer of potential to it. Day 33 through the UFO brewer, and after 8 days worth of rest from the first time we tried this coffee, it has finally started to pay off in terms of that, as the coffee has opened up significantly, I should say, in comparison to the earlier days. Less of the grainy honey quality with a little bit more intensity to the citric characteristics, and also a higher level of sweetness as well. The honey does continue to remain the most abundant characteristic, which will be a continuous theme throughout this review. There's also a better defined florality, so I'm starting to see all the characteristics open up, which goes to show that a little bit of patience letting this coffee rest will definitely yield a lot of positive results. Day 37 through the V60 with Ceto's recipe, so of course that's the 16.25 to 1 at 92 Celsius. And the coffee was the best it had been to this point, as it's starting to offer a lot more of the wildflower honey qualities that is reminiscent of some other coffees that we've had with the same descriptors. So I'm thinking of the Heza Hills coffee that we reviewed from Exposure Therapy earlier this year. There's still a little bit of the grainy and tea-like qualities to it, but as this coffee does cool down, it opens up significantly in the other characteristics, offering a peach iced tea-like quality to it. That's often what I experience from a lot of coffees that have this very light profile to it. I'm thinking of a lot of Shoebox's coffees as well, as off brew, they can be a little bit generic, tame, and offering some of the grainy citric qualities, but once it does cool down, you do see a little bit more intensity to it and better definition to a lot of the other characteristics within the coffee. Day 41 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it honestly felt like we were having a lot of struggle with brewing this coffee with this specific brew method, as it was essentially turning out super tea-like with more of the wildflower honey feel and traces of stone fruit. Notably less graininess with time, so that definitely just seemed to help in terms of toning that quality down. But for the most part, a little bit more generic with more of the lemon citric qualities to it. So you are seeing a lot of consistency in the things that we're picking up. The main thing was just an increased intensity and definition the more we let this coffee rest, and the slight adjustments and tinkering we did make to it. day 45 through the V60 with Ceto's recipe. And this was the best the coffee had been to this point, as it feels like the coffee is much closer to what it should be in terms of rest. It still felt like it was probably going to need a few more days regardless, as it does have a little less of these strong tea qualities and graininess in comparison to most of the other days, offering a much cleaner base with a fair bit more of some peachiness and softer florality present in a delicate but well-defined sense. So that in theory is what you'd expect from a wash-processed Gesha Village coffee. Day 57, final notes we have. So we did let this coffee sit. I was sitting on the review for this one for a little bit, largely because we had some other coffees to review, but I also was curious to see what would happen with some more rest. And it did prove to pay off, as we opted for Ceto's recipe, and the coffee was the best it had been to this point, as it does have still a little bit of the grain qualities off brew, but it does cool down very well into a combination of peach, honey, black tea, with plenty of floral and citric qualities ranging from the listed magnolia to some Earl Grey, a little bit of jasmine, honeysuckle, as well as a prominent tangerine and bergamot-like qualities. So much better to find, much easier to pick out a lot of these characteristics, especially as this coffee does cool down, with a much improved result overall. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, and as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, it looks like what you'd expect from a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee, but let's go through it. We'll start with the cleanliness level 4. I feel like maybe if this coffee didn't still have a lot of the grainy characteristics, even at that day 57, day 59 mark that we were working on this coffee, then perhaps it could have been a little bit higher, but I don't think it ever actually had the potential to reach that level 5 in terms of cleanliness, because it doesn't have one ultra-defining characteristic outside of maybe the honey quality to it. So level 4 is where we opted to put that. Obviously a very clean coffee, just not to the same extent as our like Panamanian Geshas or ultra clean coffees. Finish level 4. The finish in itself, it wasn't necessarily the most intense. As mentioned, this coffee for the most part is a little bit subtle throughout. So level 4 is kind of where we opted to put it. Don't necessarily have anything I really want to highlight for that. Mostly the citric qualities linger a fair bit in that. Sweetness level 4, kind of the same thing in that it's not going to be the sweetest coffee. I don't think that it's ever intended to be the sweetest coffee, but given that there's such an abundance of fruit and floral characteristics to them, all present in a, I would say, moderately sweet sense, I felt it was probably closer to a level 4, given that it was a little bit more sweet than it was bright, so that's why we opted to put that there. Florality level 4, I mentioned a number of floral qualities to this one, so you have that honey characteristic, magnolia, so obviously going into it you were expecting a much more floral experience, and then in addition to that I was able to get some traces of jasmine, as well as it's a very light florality within this coffee. So I don't think I have too much to expand upon that. It also didn't reach the level 5 mark, where I don't necessarily think that having a coffee this subtle and tame ever really had potential to reach the level 5 for any of the characteristics, truth be told. Citrus fruit level 4. I don't quite recall whether or not they had any sort of citric notes to it, but tangerine, bergamot, traces of lemon at time, all an abundance of citric qualities within this coffee, so plenty of that, fully expected for a Gesha Village coffee. Couple of level 3s, we will start with the acidity level 3. And one thing that's kind of funny is I do remember reading on Ceto's website that they do want to highlight the acidity of their coffees. And this one, washed Ethiopian coffee, it's rare that we score too many of them at a level 4, but as I'm drinking this coffee now, I don't think it really ever had potential of reaching that level 4 mark. It's a more moderate brightness to this coffee. I usually love using the word subdued when it comes to coffees that are this light, that have that sort of subtle acidity to them, and that demonstrates this one to a T, or represents this one to a T. A stone fruit level 3, and I was able to get a little bit of the stone fruit qualities, thinking a little bit of the peach characteristics, not necessarily the most abundant, kind of complemented by the savory black tea characteristics, which is why we have the savoriness there at a level 3. I really like peach black tea, so that for me works out. It's probably my favorite part of this coffee. But then the final thing worth discussing, we have the body level 2, not the most textured coffee, but again, I don't think it was ever expected to be. Just a little bit above the tea-like characteristic. When we brewed this coffee with a Chemex, it was a level 1. When we brewed this coffee with a Chemex, you can change a lot of things on this tasting wheel. It's going to probably bump down the sweetness to a level 3, citrus fruit, it's probably staying there, but then the body is probably going all the way down to level 1. So a little bit of change based off which brew method you opted for on this coffee. But outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what we are getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Funny enough, this one does remind me of the other Ceto coffees we've reviewed in the past. I do feel like there is a pretty common theme to their coffees, as they do tend to have this kind of light profiled characteristic, more subdued, tame experience to them. And while there are other coffee roasters that we review that also offer these similar characteristics, I feel like with those, we've just had a wider variety of coffees that have resulted in much different experiences. So the coffees we've reviewed from Ceto have been, I want to say, another Ethiopian coffee and then a Peruvian Gesha. So in theory, those coffees would be on the more tame, subtle side of things, and that's what happened with this coffee as well. But my favorite coffee that we've ever had from them was the Pink Bourbon coffee, which is a coffee you'd expect to have maybe a little bit more intensity to it. So that's why oftentimes I wonder if this profile translates a little bit better into those sort of coffees, as I usually get better results from them. One final note I wanted to add on this one is I actually had this coffee at a coffee event, and the results turned out extremely similar to how I was brewing this coffee as well. So I would say that this is just kind of the way the coffee is intended to be, which is fine. I feel like it's actually very nice. It's a very safe coffee. It kind of reminds me of the way I feel about calendar coffees, where they do have a very high floor, and I feel like there's potential for a very high ceiling. But in the case of this coffee, I feel like it was just about the range of what you'd expect for a very well done wash processed Ethiopian coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. We do have to start with the profile, given that it is pretty light, and this coffee did require an extended period of rest, as there was some grainy qualities even by the time that we finished this review, so keep that in mind. Outside of that, the best of this coffee does come after a little bit of a cool down, but you are rewarded by some really nice definition and depth, as there were quite a few characteristics in a floral and citric sense. So I'm essentially talking about a wash processed Gesha right here. So what you'd expect from a lighter profiled wash processed Gesha coffee, kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to hear your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Gesha Village Lot 25032, wash processed Ethiopia from Ceto Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.